Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stream 1, Digital Transformation in Emerging Nations. Before we get started with our first presentation, a couple of little housekeeping items, just to let you know that there will be 50 minutes for the presentation in total, or rather 40 minutes for the presentation and 10 minutes for Q&A. For the Q&A, you'll be able to vote on which questions you would like asked. Everything will be recorded and you will be sent a link. These sessions will be available in CVent for 90 days, then on the Digital Transformation YouTube channel. Our speaker today is Deniz Susar. And Deniz's main work areas include e-government, internet governance, smart cities, artificial intelligence, ICT indicators, and in general using ICTs for sustainable development in general. He takes an active role in the preparation of the annual Internet Governance Forum meetings and its inter-sessional work. He also leads UN DESA activities on the World Summit on Information Society. The title of Deniz's talk today will be A Methodology to Measure Global E-Government Progress. And since its inception in 2001, the United Nations E-Government Survey has become an indispensable ranking, mapping, and measuring development tool for digital ministers, policymakers, and analysts delving into comparative analysis and contemporary research on e-government. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Deniz.
Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I know we are online, so I don't know where the people are. My name is Deniz Susar. I work in the Digital Government branch at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And today I will be talking about the United Nations E-Government Survey, briefly about its methodology and some findings. As Steve mentioned, we've been doing this publication since 2003. We kept the methodology pretty much same, which I will go through briefly. This is, to our knowledge, the only survey that assesses e-government development of all 193 countries at the United Nations. It's a benchmark tool to measure e-government development, to build government capacity in ICTs, and also provide some policy recommendations. But I think more importantly, share good practices around the world. You can have a look at this URL that I share here on this slide. It's where we keep the data and findings from the survey, which we will be publishing the 2022 data in September during the upcoming General Assembly session in New York. So before I start the methodology, I just want to say that this presentation may not last 40 minutes, and I hope that I will be able to get some questions and feedback inputs, how we can improve the methodology and how we can really work together with you in this work. So EGDI, E-Government Development Index, is the outcome of this research. Basically, we give a score between 0 and 1, a normalized score to all UN countries according to their EGDI. EGDI has 3 equal components. 1/3 comes from online service index. The other third comes from telecommunication infrastructure index, and the other third comes from human capital index. So basically, the concept is simple. In order to use e-government services, you need to have enough adequate human capital in the country. And as a proxy, we measure these with some education and literacy indicators from UNESCO and UNDP. You also need to have a strong telecommunication infrastructure. These subcomponents of TII change from edition to edition, but most recently we look at mobile subscribers per 100 people, fixed broadband, internet users, and active mobile broadband subscription. These come from ITU. And the last but not least, online service index. This is our assessment of the web portals of the UN member states. And online service index has 5 different subcomponents, which we list there: institutional framework, content, services, participation, and technology. I will go through these in detail in the next slides. So how do we do the survey? First, we have a preparatory phase. So during this phase, we send out some questions, surveys to member states and also the most populous city in each country. I will come to the cities in the next slides. And we recruit volunteers who will assess the government portals for us. For example, in Canada, we would have 2 people living in Canada and with ideally with residentship who are using e-government services in Canada, and same for all countries. So we would end up with 193 times 2, around 400 volunteers one summer, and we train them and they use our platform to do the assessment. And then we come to data verification and finalization. Of course, 2 researchers assess the portals blindly. One says yes, one says no to some features, and then there are discrepancies. At that moment, we introduce them and they discuss and they come to an agreement. After that, the surveys come to us and in our branch, we verify, we do some checks and then publish the results online. Yes, about institutional framework. These are all features on a website of the country. So we look at organizational structure and government names and titles of government agencies, department, ministers, links to any subnational local government agency, if they have a CIO, if there's a private statement, and the list goes like this, such as if we can access to a digital government strategy, laws on access to information, do we inform citizens about these, their rights on the website, etc. So it's more about institutions, the first part. Then about the content, this is really pretty much a long list, and I don't want to read all these, but we start with pretty much any kind of relevant content for residents. It can be like recycling, reuse of waste in health policy, health related information, electricity or power outage, education, early childhood development, all these kind of things that may affect the lives of citizens. So this is grouped under content. Services. So these are more like you can interact with the government, you can do some transaction, you can apply for a driver license, or you can apply for a building permit, birth certificates, registering online for new car, etc. Anything that you can transact with the government, marriage certificate. This is grouped under the services. These usually require an authentication, an ID, and usually there's a one-stop shop, on the eGovernment portals where you can see all the services in a country. So this is pretty much about it, the services. I mean, we can also group them according to life events, utilities, permits, taxes, fines, fees, residence-related items, registration, etc. And the next one is about participation and engagement. So we define e-participation. First, you need to have information in order to engage with any kind of government matters. So first providing an information, and then are there any consultations going on, deliberation on public policies or services with the residents. We look for evidence for this, and then finally e-decision making. Of course it's very difficult to find evidence online for e-decision making, but we look for portals or websites evidence that their consultation and information is taken into consideration and some kind of decision is made. This is a slide just to depict the relationship between e-participation, e-government, but also e-participation is contributing to inclusion, transparency, and participation. So one of the sub-components of the online service and index is e-participation index. So we also group countries according to their e-participation levels. And these are some of the things we check related to participation and engagement. Basically, are there some online tools to invite and obtain public opinion? Are there some forms, consultations, etc. But as I said, because our methodology for e-participation also includes information, so we also look at some content related when we are building up this e-participation index. And last, we look at some technical features on the website. So are there search engines? Like, for example, is the government website coming up in the first page in the most used search engine in that country? Are there any web statistics like new visits, etc., total basically hits? Are there any guidance to use the services? If there is more than one official language in the country, is the portal also supporting that? Is it up to date? Is it some websites you may not believe are just sitting there for a long time? So are we really using the website? And some advanced features, for example, you start a transaction, can you complete it later? Can you stop in the middle and can you complete later, etc. So when we do all these assessments, we look at 6 sectors as well. These are education, health, environment, employment, social protection, and justice. So we start with the national portal, but we also go all these usually ministry line or department level portals as well. And during the assessment, also people in vulnerable situations, are there any specific services for persons with disabilities? We look at W3C accessibility guidelines. If the websites support these, are there any services for youth, women, people living in poverty? These are in addition to services. Are there any specific services for these groups like migrants, older people, etc. Like Polish government right now has introduced many services, for example, for the people traveling from Ukraine. So things like that. And local online service index. So in 2018, we've also introduced this local online service index just to see how the municipalities are using their portal to deliver services to residents. We started with 40 cities in 2018, 100 cities, reached to 100 cities in 2020, and in the upcoming edition, we have looked the most populous city in every UN member state, 193. The reason for this is simple. Municipalities are closer to people, and if you think of your online engagement with governments, you may also agree with me that most of the time you deal with your local government. So we are trying to help cities to measure their progress and also a motivation to further improve. Since we are only looking at the most populous city, we have some interest from some countries to apply our methodology to more cities in their country. So we are partnering with, for example, right now with some countries to apply our methodology to the largest cities in their country. We just finished one study with Jordan, which we will publish the results. Brazil and State of Palestine, even though not a UN member state, also joined this initiative, and we finished those as well. So you can find those in our website. So if there is any interest to apply our methodology to more cities in your country, we would be very much happy to talk to you. So some findings, and then I will stop my presentation. So first of all, if you look at the world, there is a really big gap. Denmark, I think, scored the highest in EGDI, eGovernment Development Index, in 2020, and South Sudan. And you see on the left side the gap here. If you look at the Africa, the dotted line is the world average. Most countries in Africa are lower than the world average. Americas, of course, some very advanced countries, but also we have some in South America below world average. Europe is pretty much everyone is up above world average. And in Oceania, of course, there is Australia and New Zealand and the rest. But I have to say there is a progress. Every year we see governments are investing more. This bar chart just show that in the very high category, very high EGDI, we had 40 countries in 2018 and 57 in 2020. And in the very low, we had 16 and it dropped to 8 in 2020. So we see some progress. These are the world leaders. And I hope and you can see all the subcomponents here: online service, human capital, technical infrastructure, and I have to say there is really not much difference when you are in this very high group among your portal, especially what we check. This like 0.96 Singapore or 0.97 Denmark can be just like one feature. And let me also tell you that when we assess the portals, we ask our researchers to just mimic a regular person. So really not try to find the feature, but does it make sense within a reasonable time? Can you locate that feature? So they are not killing themselves to find the features. So these countries that are in the very high, they have a consistency in strategic digital policy areas and in implementation of digital public services. Usually they have a one-stop shop where you see all the online services in one portal. They have, of course, digital ID, and when they introduce a new service, digital by design is the first thing that comes to mind. And they have a CIO in charge of a long-term digital agenda. And of course, not to mention about legal and regulatory frameworks and application of new technologies. This is looking at by income level. I mean, obviously, there is a correlation with positive correlation with the income. high income countries are also in the very they have very high online service index values, but of course there are always some exceptions. This is just showing services by region. If anyone is interested in this, you can look at chapter 2 in UN eGovernment survey. I mean, I think next slide will be more meaningful, and like paying for utilities is the most common, and applying for government vacancies online or paying for utilities is the most common service that we see. And we see the number of services, online services, has increased from 2018 to 2020. I think exception of applying for visa, just like that decreased, and I'm guessing there were some visa exemptions during those 2 years. So there were, I don't know, maybe there were no need for that service anymore. This is services, the most favorite services: registering for business, applying for government vacancies online, and applying for a business license, followed by birth certificate, death certificate, marriage certificate, and paying for utilities. We also look at open government data. You know, there was this hype about open government data portals early 2010s, and you can see the progress on that. 153 member states have these portals now, and we may also come up with an further study on this in the upcoming edition. This slide is showing us some findings from the local online service index. So if we compare city portal to their national portal, we see only a handful of cities really performing better than their national portals. Basically, these cities are listed here in the red diagram. And Madrid and Bogota, Berlin are one of those. But most of the national portals have much more features than the city portals. So this is something to note. There is more investment at the national level, and these are the cities that are high ranked according to different subcomponents. Yeah. I just leave the slide on just for you to see, and I'm pretty sure the slides will also be available for you later. So as I mentioned, performance of city local government portal doesn't usually match its country. The average LOSI is 0.43, so there is really, that means that the average 43% of the features that we assessed were available on the city portal, so there is room for improvement. The content provision criterion is the highest, so they have lots of content, and of course less is services, and there may be many reasons for this. Maybe services are provided at the national level, so this is something for further research. But and also majority of the city portals did not have various technology standards, but they were accessible through mobile devices, and we noticed they also rely on social media heavily, city portals. With this, I know it's been 25 minutes. I would like to stop here. And my email is here, susar@un.org. If anyone is interested in for further collaboration or any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you for listening.
Well, Deniz, on behalf of the conference and all participants, thank you very much for this very enlightening presentation. I would encourage anyone who has a question to ask of Deniz to do so in the live QA. But while we're waiting, Deniz, I didn't see Canada. How does Canada stand? How does Canada and Canadian cities fare?
Canada numbers are not at the top of my head, but I think they are in the, Canada is in the very high, which means in the most advanced countries in the world. I have to check the city if we may not have included the city in the previous edition in 2020 because we had only 100 cities. But Canada is doing very well in the online portal. But the infrastructure, I think, is the numbers in my last check were not as high as some other developed nations. So that's something to think about more. And the largest city, I have to check and get back to you while you get other questions.
Okay. How difficult is it for you to obtain responses to this survey? In other words, do you have to keep on top of this and constantly remind people that it's time to respond?
Yes, maybe maybe I'll just, if you allow me, I'll just share the eGov KB. Do you see my screen now?
I see your screen.
Okay. You see the Canada?
No, I'm just seeing the thank you.
Oh, okay. So I was...
There it is. Yes, I see it now. There's a bit of a lag.
Okay, great. Before I respond to your second question, I just wanted to show the knowledge base. So basically, you can go to publicadministration.un.egovkb and choose Canada, and anyone can study all these. So what I was referring to is Canada is in 2020 is in the very high EGDI. It's ranked 28. The number is 0.84. And if you look at the subcomponents, this is what I was referring to. For example, for online service index, Republic of Korea has scored all the features that we assessed in 2020, and Canada scored 84% of it. But if you look at the telecommunication infrastructure here, I see 78%. This tells me that with the infrastructure, maybe because of the disadvantage of being a large country, there may be some broadband. I'm not familiar with the infrastructure in the country. That could be something. And human capital, of course, is advanced. So that's a response to your first question about getting responses. So we have two phases of the study. One, we sent to countries and we asked them to help us which portals we should assess, and with some institutional framework, if they have a CIO, etc. That part is pretty much with the member states, and that takes for us pretty much 1 year to get some full response from all member states. And I have to say our response rates are 75–80%. But when we recruit volunteers, they have to complete the assessment during the assessment window. So we give them like strict deadlines. All the country is assessed at the same time, and all the volunteers do it at the same time, so we can control our assessment much better.
Okay. Thank you. A couple of questions have just come in. First, have you measured the impacts of IS investments from a socio-political perspective?
Do you still see my screen, or?
Yes, I see the country selector.
Okay, good. Now I stop. Yeah, I mean, I have to tell you this. The survey is looking at the demand supply side. So we are looking at the human capital, infrastructure, and the web portals. It is very difficult for us to measure the demand and also impact. So This is one of the limitations of the survey. Let me put it this way. So the survey is more measuring the supply side. So if you come to impact, we look for evidence on the portal, and this is just a proxy for us. But for measuring impact, and there are other studies that are done in individual countries. For example, we have a project in Bangladesh where there are some impact studies together with the government of Bangladesh that we conducted. But measuring impact, measuring usage are out of the boundaries of the survey.
That may tie into the next question, Deniz, which is, how does your survey take into account the quality of the information presented on the government websites in terms of accuracy, completeness, and free of bias?
Oh, okay. So when we ask volunteers to assess a feature, they have to provide a comment about each question. And this is done by 2 volunteers for all the national portals plus the city portal. So this is one way of assessing quality for us. When the surveys come to us, we always look at the comments. And sometimes like there may just be an open data portal, but with no data in it, just for the sake of having it there. And this may be true for other features. And we know that some countries are focusing more on the rankings, which in our view is not the right way. So for us to check the quality is going through the comments and doing our own checks. So that's one way of doing it. And as I mentioned again, I want to re-emphasize, for us, it's more important to be in different country groupings, more in the high level, low level, etc., rather than really focusing on the ranking between Singapore and Denmark. It doesn't really our motivation to do this survey. And moving forward, we are trying to balance our approach as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question: how interested is the private sector in this information? Can it be leveraged by the private sector for whatever reasons?
I had a slide that was showing the list of research institutions and private sector actors that are using the survey, like Economist Intelligence Unit, Capgemini, etc. So I think that just gives them an entry point for their own incentives. But with the private sector in applying the survey methodology, we don't have any partnership or anything. So I think the survey could be used by the private sector.
Definitely, definitely. Just check to see if there are any final questions. That's it for questions, Deniz. I'd like to thank you once again for this very informative, thought-provoking presentation. And I'm glad to hear, as a Canadian, that Canada is faring quite well in terms of adoption of the adoption and use of the internet. So I thank you very much. I thank all participants as well. And we'll have a little bit of extra time for a break right now. Then we'll get into our next session coming up at 13:20. Once again, Deniz, thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you everyone for your interest.